Would you stand up for a veteran being wronged? Here's how one young man turned a terminal into a movement. The bustling terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was filled with familiar sounds, distant announcements, murmured conversations, and the steady shuffle of suitcases. Among the passengers, a Navy veteran named Thomas sat near gate C-23, accompanied by his faithful service dog, Max. Thomas, a middle-aged man, wore a t-shirt that read Semper Fi and a hat embroidered with the same words. Max, wearing a service dog vest, stood at attention, his eyes alert and scanning the crowd, always ready to act. Thomas wasn't just another passenger. After years of service overseas and the challenges of readjusting to civilian life, Max became more than a companion. He was Thomas's lifeline, trained to detect and respond to the anxiety and panic attacks that plagued him. Flying wasn't easy for Thomas, but with Max by his side, it became possible. They were scheduled to catch Flight 172 to Los Angeles, where Thomas would be attending a veterans advocacy event. As boarding began, Thomas approached the gate agent with Max and his documents. However, instead of acknowledging him, the agent hesitated and began looking at a tablet. "Excuse me, sir," the agent said, "but there is a problem with bringing your dog on this flight." Thomas was confused. "Problem? He's a registered service animal. I have all the paperwork here." The agent looked at the line forming behind Thomas and lowered his voice. "It's a new airline policy. Certain animals are not allowed on board, even with documentation." Nearby passengers began to pay attention. Thomas's voice, firm but frustrated, rose. "This dog is not a pet. He is a service animal. Do you understand what that means? He is here for my medical needs." The agent shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following protocol, sir." Max, sensing Thomas's agitation, gently nudged his owner's leg with his nose. The tension in the air was palpable, and Max's calmness highlighted the growing insecurity around gate C-23. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. A middle-aged man with his arms crossed watched intently. A young mother holding a baby stopped, her eyes reflecting concern. The situation was about to escalate. "Are you kidding me?" An older man muttered to his wife. "That man fought for this country and now they're giving him trouble because of his dog?" The gate agent's supervisor, now visibly frustrated, tried to intervene. "Sir, we understand your concern, but the airline has updated policies. We cannot make exceptions." Thomas's voice rose, calm but authoritative. "Exceptions? This isn't about exceptions. It's about rights. You can't decide my service dog isn't valid because of a policy you barely understand." Max remained beside Thomas, his body pressed against his owner's leg as if offering silent support. Passengers in the line began to approach, their curiosity quickly turning to indignation. "This is not right," said a young woman holding her passport. "If it was just any dog, that would be fine. But this is a service dog." A man in his 30s pulled out his cell phone and started recording. "People need to see this," he said. "This is ridiculous." The supervisor, feeling the weight of the public's attention, tried a different approach. "Sir, we can try to reschedule you on another flight where this won't be a problem," Thomas replied, his voice shaking with anger. "That's not the point. I'm not just a guy with a dog. Max is the reason I can even be in an airport. You think rescheduling solves anything? This isn't just about me. It's about how people like me are treated." The crowd around Thomas grew. A mother with a stroller approached, her face reflecting empathy. An elderly woman holding her carry-on bag shouted in support, her lips pressed into a thin line. The man recording said, "Hey, aren't service animals protected by law? That doesn't sound cool." The supervisor hesitated, looking nervously at the camera. "We're just following airline policy," she replied, but her voice cracked. Thomas turned to the audience, his voice louder now. "Are you listening to this? After everything I've been through, they want to deny me basic respect because of their policies. Is this what we've come to?" The terminal fell silent. The kind of silence that comes when people don't know what to do. The tension in the air was thick, the frustration almost palpable. But just when the situation seemed about to spiral out of control, a calm but firm voice cut through the noise, drawing everyone's attention. A few meters away, a tall, composed young man approached. His clean and calm appearance contrasted sharply with the growing chaos. It took a moment for the audience to recognize him, but the realization spread like wildfire. "It's Barron Trump," someone shouted, loud enough to confirm what the others were thinking. Barron, carrying a small suitcase and a boarding pass, approached Thomas and Max. His voice was firm, but it carried an authority that belied his youth. "I'm sorry," he said, addressing the supervisor directly. "What's going on here?" The supervisor hesitated, clearly taken by surprise. This service dog does not meet the new requirements for this flight. Barron looked at Thomas and then at Max. Doesn't meet the requirements? This man is a Navy veteran, and this is a service dog. Which part of this situation seems right to you? The audience, encouraged by Barron's presence, murmured in agreement. A woman nearby said, "Exactly, he's not asking for anything unreasonable." Barron's tone remained calm, but there was a firmness in his words. "I'm fairly certain that federal law protects service animals regardless of airline policies. Are you really willing to break the law for this?" The supervisor's confidence visibly wavered. She opened her mouth to respond, but Barron continued. "This isn't just about rules. It's about doing the right thing. Imagine what this man has been through, and now you're denying him his dignity over a technicality." Thomas, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "I didn't expect someone to stand up for me like this, but thank you." Barron nodded at him before turning to the supervisor. "I suggest you call someone higher up to handle this, because this is going to become a much bigger problem if it isn't resolved now." The man with the cell phone recording the incident added, "You have people filming this from every angle. Do you really want to be the face of this story when it hits the news?" The supervisor, now visibly sweating, picked up her walkie-talkie. "I'll talk to the manager," she said, walking away. Barron turned to Thomas and held out his hand. "Thank you for your service, sir." Thomas shook Barron's hand, a gleam of gratitude in his eyes. "I've seen a lot of things in my life, but this is the first time. You didn't have to get involved, but I appreciate it." Max seemed to relax a little, his tail flicking slowly, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. But while the tide seemed to turn, the resolution was still far from certain, and the audience watched, holding their collective breath, to see what would happen next. As the supervisor disappeared into a nearby office to make a phone call, the atmosphere in the terminal changed. What had started as a quiet dispute now felt like a communal playground. Passengers gathered closer, their voices raised, some recording, others openly expressing their displeasure. "This is bigger than airline policies," said a man in his 50s. "What happened to basic respect?" The young mother in a t-shirt shouted, "This is disheartening. A Navy veteran and his service dog? This shouldn't be a debate." Barron, standing next to Thomas, addressed the audience. "We can't just watch and let things like this happen. It's about standing up, even when it's inconvenient. Otherwise, what does it say about us?" The audience murmured in agreement. An elderly lady with a cane stepped forward. "Son, I've lived a long life and I've learned one thing. When someone is right, you fight for them. You don't let them fight alone." Applause erupted from the group, disturbing the gate agents behind the counter. One of them nervously whispered to her colleague, her eyes trained on the growing crowd. Thomas, touched by the support, looked around, his voice rising a little as he spoke. "I don't even know what to say. For years I've felt invisible, like no one sees what people like me go through. But today, you made me feel like I matter again." Max stepped away from him, his firm presence supporting Thomas in the moment. A teenage boy approached, holding a book. "Sir, may I shake your hand? My grandfather was a sailor too." Thomas smiled and shook the boy's hand. "Your grandfather must be proud of you." The gate supervisor reappeared, her face a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. She opened her mouth and approached Barron and Thomas. "We spoke with the airline's management, and they agreed to make an exception in this case." The audience burst into applause, but Thomas raised his hand to calm them down. "An exception?" he said, his tone measured but firm. "This isn't about exceptions. It's about doing what's right. For me and every veteran or person with a disability who comes after me, Max and I deserve more than a temporary exception." Barron agreed. "He's right. This isn't over. Policies like these need to be reviewed. People shouldn't have to fight for something that's already protected by law." The supervisor, clearly uncomfortable, responded, "We will take this feedback to the appropriate team." But the energy in the crowd had already shifted. This wasn't just about Thomas. It was about something bigger, something everyone felt motivated to fight for. The applause slowly died down as the supervisor walked away, her control of the situation slipping through her fingers. Thomas adjusted his posture, taking a deep breath. He didn't want a temporary victory. He wanted meaningful change. Barron seemed to sense this, moving closer to Thomas and speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't just about one flight or one veteran," Barron said, addressing the gate agents and the public. "It's about respecting the people who have given so much to this country. Policies like these aren't just inconvenient. They're harmful." The gate supervisor hesitated, then spoke firmly. "You're right. she said, though the words sounded more like a concession than a conviction. We'll make sure this incident is reviewed at the corporate level. Thomas looked at Barron, his gratitude full in his expression. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just stood in line and watched. Barron shook his head. If we stop and do nothing, we are part of the problem. My dad always told me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always courageous. The supervisor gestured to the boarding area. Mr. Thomas, Max is cleared to board. Let's make sure you're seated comfortably, Thomas replied, his arms relaxing a little, though his voice remained firm. Thank you, but I hope you'll think about what this means for the next person in my situation. As Thomas and Max walked toward the gate, the crowd cheered, not just for them, but for the principle they represented. People smiled, clapped, and shouted words of encouragement. Barron stood back for a moment, watching as the veteran boarded the plane. A woman in her 30s approached him. That was amazing, she said. Most people wouldn't have said a word. Barron smiled. Most people do care. They just need someone to remind them that they can make a difference. Thomas looked back at the plane, meeting Barron's eyes. He raised his hand in thanks, his face a mix of relief and determination. Max, as if sensing the significance of the moment, wagged his tail once before following Thomas into the plane. But as the plane door closed, the real impact of what had happened remained with those left behind. A collective reminder of the power of standing up for another. The terminal slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy left behind felt different. People talked, exchanging glances and whispered words about what they had just witnessed. Strangers who would have passed each other by now felt a shared connection, forged in a moment of standing up for what was right. On Flight 172, Thomas sat near the window, Max resting comfortably at his feet. He stared out at the tarmac, the adrenaline of the encounter finally dissipating. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not just as a veteran, but as a person whose struggle and dignity mattered. Meanwhile, Barron Trump sat a little way back. He wasn't seeking attention or validation for what he had done. However, his satisfaction came from knowing that he had acted when it mattered. A flight attendant approached him quietly, saying, "Thank you for what you did back there. You made a difference." Barron simply nodded. We all did. As the plane took off, the crowd at gate seat 23 began to disperse, but many still carried the story with them. Social media posts were already circulating, with hashtags like #RespectOurVeterans and #ServiceDogs. Our heroes were growing inside us. Videos of the incident were gaining traction, with thousands of comments applauding the courage of those who stood up, especially the young man who led the fight. This moment wasn't just a passing event. It was a reminder of how small actions can add up, inspiring others to do the same. The moral was clear. When faced with injustice, silence is never the answer, no matter the response. Compassion and courage are contagious, and when one person stands up, it empowers others to follow. As the video comes to a close, the narrator's voice offers a final thought. We all have a choice. Whether in a busy airport terminal or in the quiet moments of everyday life, we can choose to act, speak out, and stand up for what's right. Let today's story remind us that when we come together, we are able to rise up. If this story resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of standing up for others. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of what really matters.